So welcome to another Elite session, guys. Whether it's your first time with us or your 10th time, I'm still going to do the introduction. So if you have been with us before, then please do just ignore this and get a drink or something. So welcome. We're a group of med students and doctors who are here to teach you your exam content. This is a year 9 biology class. Okay, so if that doesn't sound right for you, then please do email info@elitemedics.co.uk to find out where you should be, and they'll send you the right link. So timings for today. We've got a 5-minute introduction at the start. This is just so you guys can know about who I am and why I'm teaching you, what we're going to cover today, and just so I can check how confident you're feeling already. Then we're going to do some teaching and have a break at 11:15. That'll be a 5-minute break. Don't worry, we don't expect you to eat lunch then, okay? Then we've got further teaching until 12:30, and that's when we're going to have lunch. Okay, so that's 45 minutes, 12:30. Please do make a note of that, because as a moderator, and I'll mention what they do in a second, the amount of questions that come in, like when's lunch, when's break, it's difficult to actually answer any biology questions. Okay, so please do make a note of when the break and the lunch sessions are. And then we're going to end about 2 o'clock. It might overrun a little bit because we have got a Q&A at the end, but you don't have to stay for that if you don't want to. So there are the timings for the day. So a little bit about me. So my name's Tom, and now those of you who've been here before will have always been taught by me, I think, because I am the year 9 biology tutor. I'm a 4th year medical student at King's in London. There's a picture of me in scrubs. I haven't been in scrubs for a while now because I've been taking a year out this year to do something separate to medicine, although it's still within medicine, GP based, but going back into med school properly next year. I also volunteer for a charity called Street Doctors. We help out by teaching first aid, essentially, to at-risk young people, particularly important in London because of knife crime being so high. And I also do taekwondo and have done for about 10 years now, nearly a black belt. I'm black tag, going to go for black belt soon, I think. So that's a little bit about me and who I am. If you've got any questions about what med school's like and what life's like at London, then please do ask me at the end, and that's fine. So today's session, we'll be teaching, and now important to note, this is a revision session, okay? This is revision on all the stuff from January through to March. So if you've been to those sessions, you will have seen a lot of the content before, but I have changed up the quiz questions, and I will be asking you generally more questions throughout to make sure you guys are trying to remember what you've learnt before, so that it's not boring or the same session as before. So as I mentioned, there will be passive questions and there will be quizzes as well. So they're free today, okay, and they should all be new questions. Now, at any point today, if you've got a question, please do ask. We have got some moderators here, and they are here to answer questions in the Teams Q&A. And please note that they are present to answer questions, but they won't be able to answer everyone's questions. So in the chat, they will publish the questions that they think everyone can learn from. Some questions will be answered privately, so don't expect all questions to be published. I know some people really want that for some reason. But yeah, otherwise, if you didn't want to ask the question there, we have got Slido Q&As as well. So we'll talk about Slido in a second. But if you want to ask me anything directly, then you can ask me on Slido and I should see that. I will also look at the Teams Q&A in the breaks, but I won't be answering questions there generally. Okay. So that's how today's going to run. And today's session, we're going to start off with gas exchange. So that's everything to do with the lungs, the respiratory system, gas exchange in the alveoli, exercise, asthma, smoking, lung cancer, everything like that. And then later today, we'll move on to the musculoskeletal system as well, and how we sort of move, what our bones are for, what joints and tendons and ligaments are, all those sorts of things. Okay. And as I said, this is revision, so you will have seen these before if you've joined us before, but it's all good practice to look at it again for your exams, which I suspect are quite soon if you haven't done them already. So topics within this overall topic are the respiratory system and the anatomy of the system, as well as how we physically breathe, gas exchange and what happens at the alveoli, aerobic respiration, including the equation, which everyone loves, and then exercise, asthma and smoking, as well as a bit of lung cancer. Okay, so how confident do you already feel about these topics? So this is our first Slido interaction. So for those of you who've seen it before, you know what to do. Just scan that QR code or follow that link and you should be able to join. For those of you who haven't, Slido is our way of interacting with you guys. So by joining this on your phone or other device, you can submit answers to us. You can rate as you can on this question here. Yeah, there's lots you can do. So hopefully people will start answering soon. I'm just going to follow the QR code myself and see if that works. Perfect. So one person has answered. So just so you're aware, there is a bit of a time delay, I think, between when I say things in my time and when you guys hear them on your screens. That's just because of the technology and there's nothing we can do about that. But I will try to keep Slido active for as long as possible. And the main reason that's a problem sometimes is because I will open Slido interactions before you see them, essentially. So on your device with Slido, they might pop up before we've actually talked about them on the slide. Just bear with it, okay? And if you know the answer to the question, then do answer quickly, because that's how you get on the leaderboards. Okay, I'm just going to check how many of us there are. So 63 of us, I think. Oh, no, more, 100. Good. So the Slido code is on the slide right now, for those of you who've asked that in the chat. Already a question on notes, and yeah, we actually send you the recording. Okay, so the recording of this session will be sent afterwards at some point in the next few days, I believe, and that should be sent to your email. I'm not quite sure what other resources they send to you. They used to send past paper questions as well, but I'm not sure if they still do that. Okay, good. So a few people have answered already. Good mix of people, mix of results. Most of you feeling quite confident. So 7s, 8s, 9s. Some of you on the lower end, some on the higher end. And that's absolutely fine to be on either end of the scale. Okay. As I said, if you're at the top, then try and answer my questions as we go through. If you're on the lower end, then we will be teaching the content still, so that will help. Okay, good. That's 50 of you. I think we'll wait a little bit longer to make sure everyone's had time to join the Slido. So well done, guys, you've done your tests already. Glad you could still join us. Hopefully this is still useful for you. This has certainly all been content that you see in the next few years in your GCSEs, and it carries on through to A-level as well, because that's the thing with biology and a lot of the sciences, it all builds upon previous knowledge. Okay, so you can never really skip out years. Okay, 55 of you. Great, so most people are an 8. Let's hope that everyone will be at 8, 9 or 10 by the end of the session. Okay, good, so I think we'll get started there, just because we have been waiting for a while. And just in case you see me looking at my phone, it's because we've got our sort of moderator chats and our Elite Medics chats. So don't worry, I'm not doing anything else. I'm just having a look at any questions that come through on there, because sometimes we have problems across the whole group. Good, right, I think we'll start them. So learning objectives, in case you wanted to have a look at these, I'm not going to read them all out because there's quite a few. Basically, we give you these to map out what the exam questions could ask about. So each of these learning objectives could be covered in an exam question, okay? And if you wanted to write these down, please do use that recording or write really quickly now, and that will help you, okay? Good. So first things first, here we have a picture of the respiratory system. Now, hopefully, for those of you who've been here before, you'll be able to recognise and label quite a few parts of this. So what I want you to do is draw down a really simplified version of this, okay? So if I was to start, I would start like that. Draw these two parts here that we can see on the diagram. Draw those splitting apart. Okay, so this is a really simplified drawing, not exactly anatomically correct. And then draw these bits. Okay, and then draw on those larger structures. And then I want you to label these, please. So we have covered these before. So you should be able to label them. So let's say, can you label this? Can you label this? Can you label these? Can you label what these are? What is this? And also this structure on the bottom, what's that? Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds just to do that. And for those of you who haven't seen the respiratory system before, don't worry, you should still be able to guess some of these because they're quite sort of obvious, like those two purple structures. I think they're quite easy. Okay. Now remember, this is a 2D picture. So for example, with these here, they actually stretch right round, as I've tried to draw on my diagram on the right, and they will even go round the back as well. So they connect onto the spinal column. So don't get confused by that. Okay. Good. So a few seconds just to finish up that drawing, add on those arrows, fill them in now, and then annotate them. What else have we drawn? There's one there, one there. I think that's it. Okay. Good. Hopefully that's enough time, just because we have got a lot to cover this morning. So if I get rid of my diagram quickly, the same labels will come up on the already drawn picture. So here we go. So we've got the mouth to start with, which wasn't on there. So that's there. Hopefully everyone got that. Then we've got the trachea, okay, or the windpipe, which is the next one. That's the first tube that the air comes into contact with as it goes through the mouth. They will go down and through the trachea into the bronchi, which is 2 sets of bronchus. Okay, that's the singular. They will then split into bronchioles, which also weren't on this diagram, but I want you guys to know. So these parts here, these little lines, these are bronchioles. Think bronchi, but smaller. So oles just means smaller. They will then finish up with the alveoli, which are these little sacs at the end. And I have mentioned them already as the site of gas exchange. And we'll look at that later. Now, outside of this, we've got the lungs. Hopefully everyone got that. So these purple structures, we didn't even include them in our diagram because we thought it was quite obvious. So these purple structures are the lungs. They can inflate and deflate. Underneath this, you've got the diaphragm. Everyone's probably heard of that, but you might not have known that's where or what it was. And then lastly, you've got the ribs, which go around the side. Again, hopefully everyone knew that. And then we didn't actually label this, but between the ribs, you've got the intercostal muscles. Okay, so as the name suggests, inter just means between. Think how international competitions are between nations. And then costal is just another word for ribs. Okay, so between ribs, intercostal muscles. So these are the muscles that you find physically between the ribs. So this line here represents that. Good. So hopefully everyone's got a good label drawing of the respiratory system. We're now going to go through each of these parts in turn. So the trachea, here's a little diagram on the side. Now, for those of you who have seen this before, can you remember how many of these rings there are? So you see here, there are these thick rings that wrap around the outside of the trachea. Can you remember what they're made up of and also how many there are? So these are made up of cartilage. Okay, so they're quite thick and strong, and basically they keep the structure of the trachea intact. Okay, and there are 20 rings. Okay, so there are 20 rings of cartilage. And now, what are these between the cartilage rings? You kind of guess based on the color they've been shaded in and how they look. So these are muscles. Okay, so this is one big strip of muscle that runs down, and that helps to regulate the size of the trachea. Okay, so let's get rid of that. So as I said before, it's sometimes called the windpipe, and here are these cartilage rings that help to keep it open and keep its structure alongside the muscle that runs down, and that can then constrict or open based on what your lungs need to be doing. Okay, so there we go, and I'll leave you a few seconds just to write up some notes on that if you haven't already. Good. Now what's cool is that inside the trachea, you've got these cells that line it. So let's say that this is if we're looking downwards. So this is the trachea. And if you were to look at this little cut section there, then you would see there are cells and they have little hairs that stick off them called cilia. And they essentially wave. So they wave like that, kind of like a Mexican wave. And so any bits of dust or mucus that are in the airways can be swept along by these cilia. Okay, so they will be swept upwards and outwards. One final thing to note is that this is not the same as the food pipe, okay, or the gullet or the esophagus, whatever you want to call it. So the esophagus is a separate pipe, okay, and that's kind of behind the trachea like that. So if this is the trachea, let's put a T, this is the esophagus behind it. So when you swallow, a little bit of tissue will then cover the trachea so the food doesn't go down that way, and it will then go down the esophagus towards your stomach rather than your lungs. Okay. As I mentioned, we've got these ciliated cells, okay, that line the windpipe, trachea. You've also got some goblet cells, and they produce that mucus that I spoke about, okay. So a quick exam question for you. When a person breathes in cigarette smoke, the goblet cells produce extra mucus and the cilia are damaged. What will be the 4 consequences of this? Is it that the mucus will build up, the lungs will shrink, airways will be partially blocked, coughing, bacteria will not be removed, leading to infection, or the windpipe will shrink? So 4 of these are right and 2 of them aren't. You should be able to tick more than one answer. Okay, and I don't think this has reset when we used this question last, hence why there's quite a few people as active on the poll, but no matter. Okay, so I'll give you a few seconds to answer that. It's hard for me to know how many have answered, but I believe it's about 40, I think, so far. Just going to check the Teams group, see how many people there are. So 117 at the moment. Good. Perfect. Right, I'll wait a few more minutes, well, a few more seconds, and then we'll carry on. Still a few answers coming in. Okay, good. I think we'll move on there for time's sake. Oh, it didn't even say. Well, that's annoying. But the answers there were mucus will build up because the cilia can't waft it. Airways will be partially blocked because of that mucus. Coughing will happen as a result because you need to cough up that mucus instead of it just being wafted up into the esophagus. And then bacteria will not be removed, leading to infection because bacteria gets trapped in the mucus. That's the whole reason why we produce it. And so if the mucus isn't removed, bacteria won't be removed. So the wrong answer there were the lungs will shrink and the windpipe will shrink. So they never really change in size unless something dramatic or traumatic happens. Okay, good. Right, so I think this is the first quiz question now. So please do join in and add your name. Seeing a lot of familiar names there, so nice to see you guys again. Okay, good. 40 of you in the quiz. I'll wait a little bit longer just so you've all got time to join. I think some people in other classes have had problems with receiving recordings, so just in case that is you and you didn't receive recordings from the last few sessions that you've been to, again, please use that same email, info@elitemedics.co.uk, just to get help with that. Apparently all recordings are available within the student portal, okay, so you just need to log in and you should all have access to that, or at least your parents should if you don't. Cool. Okay, so that's 67 of you on the quiz, and more will join, I'm sure. So first question. This isn't the actual quiz, by the way, but this does still count as a quiz question. These cells work together to keep the lungs free of bacteria and dust particles. What word describes a group of similar cells which work together? Is it a tissue, organ, lung, or team? Okay, so this looks back at previous topics we covered, such as hierarchy in the body. So don't worry, we've not actually covered these definitions today, but this is a nice little test of how much you remember from before. Good, thanks to those who've answered really quickly already. It's great to see. Not too hard a question, I don't think, this one. Great, so out of everyone who's actually joined the quiz, we've had most of the answer, which is really cool to see. So I think I'll wait till 70 of you and then we'll move on. Great. Actually, for the sake of time, let's leave it at that. So great, yeah, most of you are right. So tissue was the answer there. So a tissue is a group of similar cells that are working together to perform the same function, okay? So examples would be things like muscle tissue or bone tissue, okay? So organs are the next level up. So they're a group of tissues, okay? And they can be different tissues. So for example, in the heart, we've got muscular tissue, but we've also got nervous tissue as well. And they all work to help the heart pump blood around the body. The lung would also count as an organ. And then team was just a made up one there. Good, so well done Ibrahim, and well done everyone else who's got that correct. Okay, good. So next up we've got the bronchi. So the trachea will split into two bronchi, first of all. So here we've got the first splitting point, so you've got the left and right. And now can you think of which one's which? Because unfortunately it's not that way around, okay? That's not correct. So when we look at the human body, we always consider it and we always label it as if we were that person. So if you imagine you were this person, let's say you've got your eyes here, okay? It looks quite scary. From their perspective, this is their left side and that's their right side, okay? So that's just to help alleviate that confusion there. And as you can see, the right bronchus splits into two secondary bronchus, okay? And that's because of the structure of the right lung, and we'll look at that later. Okay, these bronchi then split into smaller tubes called bronchioles. So we already saw that. So if we were to draw that on this diagram, they might look like that. Okay, and they branch off from the bronchi, and there are lots of them, and they branch out, reaching to alveoli, which are these little sacs at the end. Okay, and then around them you have lots of blood vessels, and we'll look more into that when we look at gas exchange. Okay, so the air will rush in through the mouth, down the trachea, down the bronchi, then it will get to the bronchioles, into the alveoli. Okay, conversely, when you're breathing out, it will do the opposite, so it will come from the alveoli up, out. Okay, so that's where the air is going when you're breathing in and out. So next up, if we were to look a little bit further out, we've got the lungs. Pretty simple, okay? But as you can see on the picture, the left has two lobes, okay? Lobes are just defined by the areas that are split up by these little fissures that go across, okay? They have fancy names like horizontal fissure and oblique fissure. We won't label that on here because you don't need to know that. So this would be the right lung, and this would be the left, and again that's because from that person's perspective that's their left and their right. Okay, good. Don't worry too much about this. So pleural membranes, I never actually knew about them until med school, so don't worry too much, but basically they surround the lungs like that, and they help to keep pressures different and the same, so that'll make a lot more sense when we cover how we actually breathe. Okay, so those are the pleural membranes. But again, don't worry too much about that. So the lungs can inflate and deflate, as you probably guessed, based on whether they're breathing in or out. So if you're breathing in, what do? Do they inflate or deflate? Try it on yourself. You can probably guess that when you're breathing in, they inflate, okay? So they get bigger. And we'll look at why that's important later. Good. Next up, we've got the diaphragm, that lies below. And as you can see on the picture, it's very muscular, okay? So it's muscular tissue. And this can relax where it's quite like a dome shape. So it's that, or it can contract where it flattens. And the way that I like to remember that is if you just put your hands together like this, put your fingers just slightly interlocking like that. When it's relaxed, it's upwards, and then when you contract, it flattens. Okay, so when you push your fingers together, sorry about the clicking, it is contracting, and that's when it flattens. Okay, so relaxed is up, flattens is contracting. Okay, so that's a way of remembering which way round they are, because that's always something that confuses people. Okay, made up of skeletal muscle. Okay, and the reason why this is important is because there are other types of muscle, and we'll cover those later, but just in case you have seen this before, we've got cardiac and smooth as well. But we can only control skeletal muscle actively. So when we sort of move our arms, for example, that's our own choice to do that. So I'm choosing to move my right arm now. And that's because that movement is controlled by skeletal muscle, so we can control it. So when you do a deep breath in, that's because your diaphragm is contracting and you're making it contract. Okay, good. So as I said, dome shapes, like a parachute almost, sort of like that. And then when you contract, it will flatten down. Okay, good. So we've looked at the basic structures of the respiratory system, not to forget the ribs and the intercostal muscles as well. So the ribs mainly serve as protection for the lungs and the heart, but they also do help to pull air in and to expel air out, as we'll see in a second. And also not to forget the intercostal muscles. I'll just put IC muscles, of which there are both external intercostal muscles and internal intercostal muscles. Okay, so what's the difference? Well, if we were to look really closely, so here we've got the ribs, here are the intercostal muscles, like so. The outer one would be the external intercostal muscles, and the inner one would be the internal. Okay. And basically they will contract to either pull the ribs outwards, which is done by the external intercostal muscles. So think external intercostal muscles contract to bring the ribs externally. Internal intercostal muscles will then pull it inwards. Okay, so make it shrink. And that's really important for ventilation, which is why I'm telling you that now. Okay, so let's get rid of that. So ventilation is breathing. Okay, so respiration is completely separate. I never want you to associate that with breathing. Ventilation is the fancy word for breathing. Breathing in is inhalation. Now, hopefully you all knew that. Okay, inhalation literally has the word in it, so hopefully that's obvious. So what's happening during inhalation? Okay, so various muscles are contracting. So internal intercostal muscles relax and externals contract. So based on what I've told you, what happens to the ribs, therefore, with these actions happening? So if the internals are relaxing and the externals are contracting, that's hopefully, as you realized, going to bring it outwards. Okay, so because of these muscles doing that, the rib cage is coming upwards and outwards like that. Okay. Additionally, the diaphragm is going to contract and flatten, so it becomes flat like that. So you can see what's happening to the inside of your body as you breathe in. You're basically creating a lot more space on the inside. So your rib cage is going outwards like that. Your diaphragm is flattening, so you're creating a bigger space on the inside. So there's higher volume. And as a result, the air pressure inside is going to decrease. Because if you imagine this amount of air, if you push it in by condensing the space, you're going to increase the pressure. And so by increasing the volume, you're going to decrease that pressure because there's more space for the air to move about in. Okay. Now, the reason why that's important is because this will then result in air rushing in. Okay, so the air pressure outside will become higher than the pressure inside the lungs. Okay, and that will push the air through into your lungs. Okay, because there's a high pressure outside. So air pressure is higher than the pressure in lungs because of this volume change. So by increasing the volume inside, you're decreasing the pressure. That's going to force the air into your lungs. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. And so based on that, have a think about what happens when you breathe out. So exhalation. So what's going to contract, what's going to relax, what's happening? Okay, so let's have a look. So exhalation, breathing out, as we said, slightly more complicated just because it's not outhalation, it's just exhalation. Okay, but everyone's heard that word, hopefully. So here we have the external intercostal muscles relaxing and the internal intercostal muscles contracting. Once again, think about what that will do to the rib cage. Okay, internal ones are contracting, so that's going to bring the rib cage inside. Okay, so it comes downwards and inwards like that. So you can already begin to see what's starting to happen. Diaphragm's going to relax, so it was like that, and it's now going to go up back into its dome shape. Remember our little hand way of remembering, so contracted, relaxed. Okay, and again, that's going to decrease the space there. So the long volume decreases, and as we said, if you condense that space, that's going to increase the pressure of the air on the inside. Okay, so this time the air pressure on the inside of the lungs, so pressure in lungs, is going to be higher than air pressure because of these volume changes, and that's going to force air to rush out of the lungs, as we can see there. Okay. So this is how we breathe. So we don't have some magical way of sort of picking the air up and pulling it in. Okay, we have to change up the volume of the inside of our body in order to pull or push that air in or out. Okay, and you do have to remember which muscles do what. Now, when you're breathing out normally, this is what happens, but there's an extra muscle involved when you breathe out forcefully. So when you do like an extra, so you can probably feel it on yourself. In fact, everyone try it. Take a deep breath in and then force air out. You can probably feel another set of muscles working, and they will be your abdominal muscles as well. Okay, so abdominal muscles will contract to help when you're breathing out forcefully. Okay, so forceful exhalation. Okay, and now you know it's the abdominal muscles. Again, try it on yourself. Easiest thing with the breathing sort of mechanisms is just to try it on yourself and to think about what's going on, because you can see your body getting smaller as you breathe out. You can see it getting bigger as you breathe in. So try it on yourselves, and hopefully then that'll help you to remember what's going on. And as I said, if you do a forceful breath outwards, then you should feel your abdominal muscles contracting. Okay. Good. So hopefully everyone's feeling a bit more confident about ventilation and how we breathe. Okay. So quiz question. From the diagram, give the letter which labels the trachea. Is it P, Q, R, or S? And if you do know this, then can you label all of the other letters as well? And give me specifics as well. Is it left or right? And there's actually a clue on this diagram to help you know if it's left or right, even if you didn't know how we normally name human bodies. Okay. Good, 58 of you. 59, I think we'll wait till 60 and then we'll move on. Doing really well for time, so that's good. Hopefully this isn't boring so far, guys, because I appreciate some of you will have covered this content before, but this is a revision session and we are going to have some different quizzes soon, so that should keep things interesting. Good. Yeah, so most of you are right, so P, well done. Those of you who did do the extension and answered what the others were, let's just have a look. So Q, that's the left bronchus, okay, and I would have accepted bronchi as well. R is the left lung, okay, or left pleural membrane if you wanted to be really sort of specific, and then S is an alveolus, okay, which is the singular form of alveoli. So there was a clue there. You could see that this on the left hand side of the picture was the right lung, because you can see quite clearly the 3 lobes of that lung. Okay. Good. Next up, from the diagram, give the label which will give the letter which labels the alveoli. So I have just mentioned that, so we'll see who's listening. So here's the picture. So which one is the alveoli? So I'll let you have a look at that, and then we'll go back onto the quiz. Hopefully you've got your answer, and we'll go back now. So 17 of you have answered. Hopefully more of you will be able to now. Good, that's 50 of you. Again, we'll wait till 60, I think, and then we'll move on. One more person, there we go, perfect. Good, yep, so most of you got it right, it was S. So we've already been through what the others are, guys, but you know, don't worry if you got that wrong, because we did have to flick back to the picture and you might just have mislabeled it. Cool. So well done, we've actually got a new leader, so well done AA right at the top there, so the time is important, but I would say we've got 34 questions today. That is a lot. Generally, people won't get them right, so if you just focus on getting them all right, rather than like doing it quickly, that's how you're going to get to the top of the leaderboard. Okay, good. So an exam question for us to go through together. So the walls of the capillaries and the alveoli are very thin. Why do they need to be thin? So we haven't actually covered gas exchange yet, but this is a revision session. So see if you can answer that. Have a think about what you'd put. It's just a 1 marker, I think. So my answer to this would be for quicker diffusion. Okay, quicker / easier. Okay. Because the oxygen, the carbon dioxide that are crossing those walls, by those walls being thin, it means there's less time for them to diffuse across. Okay. Next question, there are millions of alveoli in the lungs. They provide a very large surface area. Why is a large surface area necessary? Again, have a think about what your answer would be. Just a 1 marker again. So don't put too much. So the answer to this is to get a large amount of oxygen into the body. So to diffuse a larger amount of oxygen. Okay, so let's see what it said. Okay, so the oxygen or carbon dioxide or gases can pass through quickly or easily. Okay, so quicker diffusion. Diffusion and pass through would be the same thing. And then so that a lot of oxygen can be absorbed or taken in. Body needs a lot of oxygen, so a lot of carbon dioxide can be removed. So with these questions, you can always talk about either oxygen or carbon dioxide, or you can keep it general and talk about gases. Okay, it's up to you. Good. So moving on from the sort of physical things of the lungs, we're now going to look at measuring different parts of the lungs, okay, and different aspects of the sort of breathing, or different aspects of breathing. Okay, so breathing rate, really simple. It's just the number of breaths per minute. Generally, we will count the number of breaths someone takes in 15 or 30 seconds, and then we'll multiply that by 4 or by 2. So if say someone breathes 4 times in 15 seconds, how many breaths per minute is that? Hopefully you got this. That was 16 breaths per minute, because it was 4 times in 15 seconds, times that by 4 to get how many times in 60 seconds, which is a minute. That's 16. Okay. Now, normal breathing rate is about 12 to 20 breaths per minute. Now you might think, oh, that sounds quite low when you start to measure your own breathing, but that's just because when you're made aware of your own breathing, you start to breathe a bit quicker. Okay, so if someone was to sort of tactically watch your breathing without you noticing, and a lot of doctors will do that, so they'll pretend they're taking your pulse, but they'll actually be counting the number of breaths you're taking. They do that so it doesn't interfere with the results. Okay. And there are some reasons why breathing rate will increase or decrease outside of you being aware of it. So have a think back to the previous session we covered this in. Think about what might cause it to increase and decrease. So there are some obvious reasons why it will go up, some less obvious reasons why it will go down, I think. So let's go through these together then. So breathing rate going up will be caused by exercise. Hopefully that's pretty obvious. If you were to start sprinting now, you would start to breathe quicker. Maybe not immediately, but pretty soon during or after. Anxiety and panic attacks, they can cause your breathing rate to go up. Okay. And then infection as well, because at that point your body needs more oxygen, okay, in order to fight the infection. Now, the reason why your breathing rate might go down are basically things that reduce the actual desire of your body to breathe or its physical ability to breathe. So what I mean by that is if you're in pain in your chest, your breathing rate will go down because breathing will be painful, okay, and so you will do it less. Shock will also cause it to go down, although it depends on the type of shock. So if it's psychological shock, that'd be a good example of the breathing rate going down. Shock from blood loss would be the opposite. So shock from blood loss would cause it to go up. And then lastly, nerve and muscle disorders, that's where you physically can't breathe, okay? So things like the phrenic nerve. So the phrenic nerve, you might be able to guess from the name, it attaches to the diaphragm and it controls the diaphragm's movement. So the phrenic nerve is how we can breathe in, essentially. If there's any injury to that nerve or it stops working in some conditions, then breathing rate will go down because your diaphragm won't be as involved, okay? And you won't be able to physically breathe as much. Good. So I'll leave it up just so you can write down some notes on that. Maybe try and think of some extra reasons as well. Good. So, unfortunately with the lungs, breathing rate isn't the only thing we measure normally. So we do have spirometry as well, okay? And this is just a way we have of measuring breathing in a little bit more detail. Okay, so this looks at amount of air we breathe. Okay, and if you have seen this before, have a think about how it works, but also what the graph we can draw from it looks like. Okay, and this is the one with lots of squiggly lines, if that helps. So how do we do it? Well, it measures the volume of air we inhale and exhale. So generally there'll be a little tube that goes to your mouth. Okay, and it detects how much air you're breathing in. Okay, because the air will go from a container, sometimes water, sometimes without, into your body, and it can detect that change, and it will detect the amount of air you breathe out, so the amount that will increase in that container. Okay, and ignore this last line for now because we're not looking at the different words yet. So as I said, this is how it works. Got the mouthpiece here. Okay, this goes in their mouth. So let's say this is the trachea and the mouth. You can see that any air that comes out will go through this tube into the water. Okay, so in the spirometers that work via water, this is what's happening. Okay, some won't be with water, but that's the easiest method. Air will force this water downwards just because it will essentially build up on the top here. And then the computer will detect this difference and then it can trace the amount of air that's changing. Okay, so this is quite a similar picture to what we've seen before. So hopefully you recognize the spirometry trace. Okay, so let's have a look in closer detail. So here is a more accurate picture. Every single one of these arrows represents a different label. So I want you to think about what this is and what it represents, what this is, what this one is, and what this one is. Okay, this is volume of air. Okay, and I can only apologise for the sirens that keep blasting outside the window. Quite close to Old Kent Road, so it's not that surprising. Hopefully everyone's okay. Good, right, so let me just remove these arrows here because we've got our own labels. So first of all, we've got tidal volume, okay, which is the amount of air you breathe in and out with normal breathing, okay? So when you're sat there at rest, which is hopefully what you are now, so if we listen to our own breathing, that small amount of air that you're breathing in and out casually, that is tidal volume, okay? And we call that because think about when you were last at the beach. Tides, they're when the water sort of rises and falls with the moon's, I think, closest towards the earth and that sort of thing. But basically water goes from low tide to high tide, and then it'll come back down again, okay, over the course of the day. And so this is why we have tidal volume, because it's a gradual increase and decrease of roughly the same amount of air. And off the top of my head, it's about 500 mils in most people, okay? Good. Next up, slightly more complicated name, okay? So we've got the expiratory reserve volume. Now let's look at the name to help us remember it. So expiratory, so it's when we're breathing out, okay? So as you can see, this is breathing inwards because the volume of air is increasing inside our bodies, and this is breathing outwards because the volume of air is decreasing inside our bodies. So expiratory reserve volume is the extra amount of air that we can breathe out with a forceful exhalation. So if you were doing normal breathing and then you were to breathe out even more, that amount of air that you breathe out there after tidal volume, so it's not this, it's just this, that extra amount of air is the expiratory reserve volume. Because it's a reserve, you normally have it inside your lungs still after tidal breathing, but you can force it out. Okay, and now there is a little bit of oxygen, well, not oxygen, air left in your lungs, okay, and this is called residual volume because it's the residual air left over after a forced exhalation. So you could never truly get all of the air in your lungs out of your body because then they would close up and they would never reopen again. So your sort of bronchioles and bronchi will actually close up a little bit and prevent all of the air from escaping. Okay, so that will be added in a second, I believe. Next up, we've got this tool label here. You can kind of guess what this is already based on the labels on the screen already. So this is the inspiratory reserve volume. And again, very similar definition to what we saw with the expiratory reserve volume. After a casual breath in, any extra air that you can breathe in, it might feel a bit weird to do that breath because you're using all of your lungs, your chest should be fully expanded. That is the inspiratory reserve volume, okay? So let's run through. So standard breathing, do a forced exhalation, that's the expiratory reserve volume, with a little bit of residual volume left, and then we go back to normal breathing. Do a big breath inwards, that's the inspiratory reserve volume. Okay, and as we said before, that residual volume was the amount left over. Okay, so hopefully this all makes sense. And now, generally, when we do a trace, it might not necessarily look the same way. So you might get a dip down, you might go back to normal breathing, and then you might get a dip up. Can't see that because of the color of the screen. Let me just change the pen. So let's make it a nice blue. So you've got tidal breathing. You've then got a deep breath out, standard breathing again, and then your deep breath in. So the sharp inhalation doesn't have to happen after the exhalation, okay? They can be back to tidal breathing in the meantime. Okay, good. So hopefully that all makes sense, and you've got a nice label diagram on your notes. Okay. Good. So we've now got our first quiz of the day. So 4 questions coming up. Only one right answer in each one. Hopefully everyone's ready. So which of these is the correct order of size from smallest to largest? Okay. Is it trachea, bronchi, bronchioles, alveoli, bronchi, bronchioles, trachea, alveoli, alveoli, bronchioles, bronchi, trachea, or bronchioles, bronchi, trachea, alveoli? Lots of words there, but just take it easy, take it slow. think about which one's the smallest, okay, and therefore which are at the start, and then which ones are largest, therefore which are at the end. Okay. Incidentally, this is also the order that air will leave our lungs. Okay, so it starts at one of these structures and then it will leave through the following structures. Good, so 48 of you already. This is quite a wordy one, so I wouldn't expect too many quick answers. So it's great to see that many people have answered already.